She was a wealthy businesswoman in love with a ranch hand.
Kathleen was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. Everybody liked her.
He loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Until their Western-style romance went dangerously wrong.
Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
And it's up to investigators to unravel the truth.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
That was the point of no return.
June 27th, 2002. It's a quiet Thursday afternoon in rural Colorado when an Eagle County 911 operator gets a call from a local businesswoman named Kathleen Denson.
She had called 911 to report that she had just shot her boyfriend.
I think it does.
Kathy, you have the gun in your hand.
No, it's on the table.
Kathy, where was he shot?
In his heart. Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
Kathy says the victim is her ex-boyfriend, Gerald Cody Boyd, and claims the shooting was in self-defense.
While on the line with 911, Kathleen Denson was nearly hysterical. She didn't want Cody Boyd to die. She did tell the dispatcher that he was demanding money from her, but she was almost hysterical with the fear that he would die.
Police and paramedics are immediately dispatched to Denson's home, located on a sprawling 77-acre horse ranch in Eagle, Colorado.
Vail is about 15 miles up the river from Eagle. It's a very rich ski town.
I was at the sheriff's office at the time that the call came in, so I was actually one of the first officers on scene. As we're approaching the scene, there's a lot of things going through your mind as an officer. Is she still armed? Are there any other people in the residence? Any dangers that we need to be aware of as we're going up to that?
Officers find Kathy outside, still on the phone with 911.
I'll never forget the scene as going in. You could still smell the discharge of the firearm. You can smell the burnt black powder as you enter the residence. And then we went in and discovered the body in the living room. Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
It's already too late. He is found dead at the scene.
The first thing that I was curious about was what her story was.
There were absolutely no signs of a struggle that we were able to determine at the scene. There was no indication that she had any injuries whatsoever.
Investigators can't help but wonder if there was more to the story than Kathy will admit. From the beginning, Kathleen and Cody's relationship had been unconventional. He was just a simple cowboy, but Kathy had been born into money as the daughter of a successful Colorado furrier.
Her father started that company. She inherited it and grew it.
There's no doubt that Kathleen Denson was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. She ran the fur store, and everybody liked her.
She actually had not just the store in Vail that was very successful. She had 2 shops in Aspen, which is about 100 miles away. That was a very successful operation, made her a lot of money, and her shops were known for very high-quality merchandise.
But while selling furs became her profession, horses had always been her passion.
Kathleen was also known by the quarter horse set because she had a lovely 77-acre quarter horse ranch, Dragon A.
She was raising quarter horses. That's not a cheap hobby, so I assume that she was doing very well.
Her ranch, I'm sure, was quite well known, and her breeding operation was quite well known. It was her first stores that made her a wealthy woman. If she had positive income from the ranch, that was a big plus.
In the late 90s, she'd hired Cody Boyd to help her run the place.
He had bounced around the valley already 3 or 4 years here, and he had had odd jobs.
What I can remember about Cody Boyd is he had a strong personality. He also liked to have a good time.
He had a bit of a reputation as a ladies' man because apparently he was charming as hell. He just had this kind of just lovely Western drawl, and he had a twinkle in his eye, and he loved pulp stories, and he loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Cody had been on the job for a few years when he divorced his wife. Soon after, their relationship became more than just professional.
It quickly developed into a romantic relationship. And then she provided for him, both as a handyman as well as her boyfriend.
As the story goes, he eventually went from the bunkhouse out to the ranch house and started living with Kathleen. Here's a wealthy, beautiful woman with money and land. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
In some cases, it's the allure and the mystery, the unknown, of really an opposite. So in some cases, the most passionate, fiery love affairs are born of these very different backgrounds.
Despite their differences, Kathy and Cody seemed to be happy together. So how had their romance ended? And why had it resulted in bloodshed?
It's hard to say exactly when things began to go south between Cody Boyd and Kathleen Denson. Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. That's completely at odds with the picture that emerged in the investigation.
Coming up, investigators uncover ties between the victim and organized crime.
Boyd was gregarious, articulate, friendly, but he absolutely had a dark side.
Sheriff's deputies near Vail, Colorado have arrested local businesswoman Kathy Denson for killing her ex-boyfriend, 45-year-old Cody Boyd.
We had a body laying inside the residence. We knew we had a person who claims to have shot the person that's laying inside the residence. So the first thing we got to do is we got to secure that scene.
One of the first things that seems out of place is the murder weapon itself.
She had set the gun down actually on the table in the kitchen.
It was an unusual weapon that she used. It was a black powder gun.
That's one of the oddest things about the Denson case. This was a replica of a 19th century black powder pistol. Hardly the most effective murder weapon out there.
Because it makes a lot of smoke when you shoot them, and there's a recoil, and you have to cock it by the hammer to shoot it, and it's kind of fun to play old-time cowboy and load them and that sort of thing.
It wasn't what you would have used had you had any kind of prior notice that you'd have to defend yourself. In fact, it might have been the last weapon you'd use in that particular home.
But the antique pistol was powerful enough to kill Cody Boyd almost instantly.
Make no mistake about it, that is a very deadly firearm.
Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell that what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
There was no signs of any struggle or any mark other than the gigantic gaping wound of the half-inch metal ball that killed him.
That bullet pushed through almost, I would say, 12 inches or more of bone and flesh.
Investigators find no evidence of a struggle.
As far as around Mr. Boyd, the decedent We didn't locate anything of suspicious activity around him. There was no other weapons, nothing else that we had found indicating that Mr. Boyd was armed or anything like that.
To get a better sense of Cody and Kathleen's relationship, detectives speak to friends and other employees.
In interviewing the hired hands there at the ranch and also interviewing neighbors, we're talking to those folks to try to help us paint the picture of what kind of person she is, what kind of person Mr. Boyd is.
They discover that the romance had been over for a while now, and money seems to have been the root of the problem.
As far as we know, Cody Boyd had nothing when he came to know Kathleen Denson. He really fit the role of the misfit, the ne'er-do-well, not someone who was successful in life.
The word was that she had paid about $100,000 worth of his business expenses.
Kathleen had purchased like a motorcycle for Cody, had purchased a semi for Cody. I believe there was a Corvette that was purchased as well, but things started going south.
Friends also point to the drastic differences in the couple's personalities. While Kathy was quiet and reserved, Cody was larger than life and liked to tell stories about his checkered past.
Boyd bragged incessantly about his claim that in his prior life he was a mafia hitman, and he certainly had the guns and ammo to make that seem convincing.
The sheriffs discovered on the ranch a big gun safe, and in the gun safe there were at least half a dozen high-powered semi-automatic weapons.
You didn't have to be a very good shot. You just had to hold the trigger down and let the 20 rounds per second be expelled from your firearm. A nasty, nasty set of guns, to be sure.
In fact, it turned out Cody had purchased the antique pistol that killed him.
And it was a Christmas gift to Kathleen, who was living out on the ranch, from Boyd. And that's one of the great ironies of this. This was not a modern firearm, and even an original black powder pistol has a significant percentage of misfires. This is not a safe firearm to be firing, let alone being fired at.
It doesn't seem like the kind of weapon one might choose if they were planning to commit murder, which supports Kathy's story. The medical examiner's autopsy report is also in her favor.
The evidence was pretty clear that he was high on cocaine, and the evidence that she would be legitimately afraid of this man with whom she'd had a long-term romantic relationship.
Cocaine is a stimulant, and it acts on the reward center of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain. So the combination of euphoria with impulsivity and the reduction of the ability to put the brakes on can be a really dangerous combination.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
It seems to be a clear-cut case of self-defense, until a new witness steps forward with a different story to tell. Coming up, Kathy is betrayed by one of her closest friends.
She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
After the first day of the investigation, it looks like modern-day cowboy Cody Boyd was killed by Kathy Denson in self-defense. However, Colorado police are about to learn that his ex-girlfriend's motives might not have been so innocent after all.
So what became apparent as we continued with this investigation was that it appeared that this was some sort of a love triangle. We knew that they were boyfriend-girlfriend, but then there's also this third person that comes into the picture, Monica Seebacher. She goes by Monique.
Monique was I believe a manager for the Vail store and was an employee of Kathleen's for several years.
Kathleen and Monique were basically also best of friends, and that certainly Kathleen confided in Monique.
However, it seems that friendship had been stretched to the breaking point. And when Monique learns about the shooting, she comes forward to tell Eagle County investigators what she knows.
She was a very forthcoming witness and wanted to be able to tell her side of the story. She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
He was in love with me, and things just, started escalating from there.
Monique Seebacher said that the reason why Kathleen Denson shot and killed Cody Boyd was because Cody loved Monique and not Kathy Denson. Now, whether that was true, I don't know.
According to Monique, her relationship with Cody began after Kathy kicked him out of the house.
2 years ago, Kathleen told me that her and Cody were having problems, and I had a 2-bedroom condo, and she asked me if he could stay there while, maybe they work some things out.
It turned out to be a little bit of a disaster because Kathleen still loved Cody Boyd. And yet here she is shoving him out of the ranch and into the arms of another woman.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend.
The relationship between Seebacher and Boyd was certainly something that she wasn't thrilled about.
Monique says she tried to preserve her friendship with Kathy, but it was clear that she was still in love with Cody and unwilling to let him move on.
Certainly, Kathleen confided in Monique. I think the evidence showed Monique it wasn't always that straightforward and confiding everything back in Kathleen.
It made things very awkward for Kathleen.
Beyond the exterior, which she was effective, she was savvy, she ran a good business, was I would have to say, a pretty tortured personality and soul, and pretty conflicted.
Monique explains that because both she and Cody depended on Kathy for their livelihoods, they tried their best to keep their romance a secret. She confesses that Kathy's generosity came with other perks as well.
All three of them had pretty strong drug habits, particularly with the drug of choice in the glitzy ski resorts, that being cocaine. And she, Kathleen, had the money to keep them well supplied. Basically, she's supporting him and his drug habit, giving him lavish gifts.
She bought him a car, guns. He basically had money to do whatever he wanted.
But all along, what Cody really wanted was Monique.
For Boyd, he had the best of both worlds. He had a woman that he was getting money from and another woman who seemed to dote on him. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
Monique questioned him, "Why are you still going to see Kathleen?" And he says, "It's just really hard for me to break up with her after all these years." That's pretty unusual, that kind of relationship, and the people involved, they're different. They're definitely different.
Monique says the beginning of the end came a few weeks before the shooting, when Kathleen asked her to help pick out an engagement ring.
There was a lot of talk of marriage, even to the extent that Kathleen had bought Cody a ring and she was going to or getting ready to propose.
Seebacher was a friend, at least that's how Kathleen considered her, and so it made things very awkward.
But the situation grew even more awkward when Kathy confided that she was planning a romantic getaway with Cody to pop the question.
Kathleen wanted to go with Cody to Cancun on a holiday trip. And Cody says, "If Monique cannot go with me and you, I'm not going to Cancun." So Kathleen was forced into kind of taking Monique.
Coming up, it's a tropical vacation none of them would ever forget.
The three of them agreed to go as a group to Cancun, and that's when things really fell apart.
As Colorado detectives untangle the love triangle between Cody Boyd, Monique Seebacher, and Kathy Denson, they begin to realize that Kathy had plenty of motive to kill her former lover. But what would she have to say about her best friend's accusations?
We wanted to find out exactly what happened. What are the circumstances that led up to this, and what led you, the suspect, to shoot the person that ultimately died? And so that's what we were trying to do as far as interviewing Ms. Denson, to get her side of the story, to help put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Under interrogation by Colorado police, Kathy asks for her attorneys and gives them little. But friends present a slightly different story from Monique's.
Kathleen Denson struggled with cocaine use during the period of time that she was with Cody Boyd. And that was part of the problem with him. Everyone wants to be loved. And Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. More and more, Cody Boyd was not just asking for things like a Corvette or a Harley. He was insisting on Kathleen giving him huge sums of money. And that really opened her eyes to what he was really all about.
But drug use and extravagant spending weren't the only dangerous things about him.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people and was a bad hombre.
Kathleen Denson was looking for love in the wrong place, because Cody Boyd was trouble from the get-go.
At first, Cody's bad boy act was a turn-on for Kathy. It wasn't until their trip to Cancun that she realized just how terrifying he could be.
If somebody is highly invested in being an outlaw or a bad boy, then citing gun ownership or citing violence that they may have perpetrated demonstrates to another person that they've attained this level of expertise or competence in their so-called domain.
Kathy financed the luxurious trip and says that when she agreed to bring Monique with them, she didn't know Cody had ulterior motives.
The trip to Cancun was between Monique, Cody, and Kathleen. And during that trip is when Kathleen had started to realize that there was a relationship going on between Cody and Monique.
She brought a ring to Cancun to propose marriage, and he had turned her down.
It would have been horrible to find out that your boyfriend, your lover, is with your best friend when you took them on vacation with you.
She could no longer deny or explain in her own mind the fact that she was really not the love object of Cody.
Once you discover that, that you would feel betrayed.
But the trip had ended in far more than just a broken heart.
In Cancun, there was a heated argument, and according to Kathleen Denson, she was beaten up by Cody Boyd, flew back to Denver, and stayed basically in isolation because she didn't want to see anybody, and she didn't want anybody to see her blackened eyes and her very, very injured face.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend and with someone that worked for her, someone who at some point in time was considered a confidant to her. And she had enough.
That was really the breaking point. That was the point of no return for Kathleen Denson.
When they returned to the U.S., Cody finally left the ranch and moved in with Monique. She was doing her best to move on from the betrayal when he unexpectedly showed up at her doorstep on June 27th.
On the day of the shooting, Kathleen Denson dropped her vehicle in town. She intended to take her 4Runner out on the road. She wanted to get some windshield time, some time for herself, and she enjoyed driving. When she got back to the ranch, it wasn't too long before Cody Boyd entered and began to threaten her.
Kathleen has said that he was trying to coerce her to give her another $300,000.
Fearing for her life, Kathy reached for something to defend herself with and wound up grabbing the antique pistol he'd given her. But in light of what they've learned so far, investigators find Kathy's version of events difficult to believe.
There were a number of different things that just didn't make sense in regards to what she was saying.
Cody was moving out his things from Kathleen's ranch and moving them into Monique's because he was going to live full-time with Monique. He didn't bring a weapon. He didn't have a gun.
On July 1st, 2002, 5 days after Cody's death, Eagle County prosecutors decide to formally charge Kathy Denson with second-degree murder.
This was the first homicide that I had investigated where there was this love triangle, and it just really muddies the water because there's so many different moving pieces.
I had concerns with a lot of people's credibility in the case. And that was an obstacle that we had to figure out, okay, what do we know versus what people exaggerate.
Coming up, the prosecution is betting that the evidence will prove their case. But will it be enough to get a conviction?
It was clear that she was a woman who was both terrified of the fact that she was charged with murder and horrified by the fact that she had had to commit murder.
"45-year-old millionaire Kathy Denson has been charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend Cody Boyd. If convicted, Kathy faces up to 48 years behind bars, but her attorneys seem confident she will be acquitted.
The prosecutors had an enormous burden. They had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kathleen Denson did not act in self-defense. And from my perspective, the deck was stacked in favor of the defense.
He entered the home angry, came at her, and she picked up the black powder gun that just happened to be in the room and shot him. And it ended up killing him.
Based on the evidence, however, prosecutors are convinced Kathy wasn't motivated by fear. She was out for revenge.
He wasn't grabbing your neck. He wasn't brandishing a heavy object. They were having a heated conversation. Does that give one a license to kill somebody because you have an argument in your house and you are able to shoot them dead in the middle of the afternoon?
We had to show that there was a reason for the murder, that there was motive. But then at the same time, we also had to show that this also was not justified murder.
Prosecutors say that evidence taken during a search of Kathy's ranch house supports their case.
There was drug paraphernalia in the residence. There were a lot of videos that we had to go through.
There was a video of them snorting some drugs, we presume cocaine.
What got more publicity was the exotic gun collection and these videotapes that Cody and Kathleen made of themselves engaged in various sexual activities.
There was no indication of any type of violence being used. It looked very consensual, very caring.
The prosecution believes Kathy was still desperately in love with Cody.
The picture that was being painted was that Kathleen was a scorned ex-lover. She was not happy with Mr. Boyd. She had given him all these things to try to win his love, and she was just very upset. And then he came back that day. Kathleen just couldn't stand the thought of Cody not being with her anymore.
And while Kathy claims that Cody had a history of violence, the truth is he'd been lying to her from the start.
Cody Boyd was known to say a number of different things, grandizing himself maybe more than what he really was. It was something to take note of, but there was absolutely no evidence that he was any type of mafia hitman or hitman at all.
I'm not aware of any prior criminal history on his part. I'm not saying he didn't have any, but if he did, it certainly wasn't significant enough to leave an impression on us.
One of his kinks was trying to get respect as a feared hitman when there was zero evidence to show he had anything to do with that.
Prosecutors argue that because Cody posed no actual threat, Kathy never had a reason to shoot him.
She had no injuries. There was no indication that she had been in a struggle or that she was in fear.
And interestingly, Kathleen never claimed. She said he kept coming at me. I was frightened. She never claimed there was any physical contact between the two.
And ballistics evidence from the scene appears to prove the distance between them.
When a gun fires, it creates stippling from the burning gunpowder. He had stippling from below his knees, on his pants, up on his face, to the top of his head. That means that the cone of burning gunpowder was in excess of 4 feet.
The prosecution noted that there were 2 doors that Kathleen could have fled out of instead of picking up the revolver and shooting the guy.
They believe that once Kathy had made her choice, her intent was clear: to kill the man who betrayed her.
Kathleen Denson was not a stranger to firearms, but was hardly an expert markswoman. At the distance that she had to fire that black powder pistol, it would have been hard to miss center mass, and that's what she aimed for.
She took a very drastic course of action for which there was no coming back.
However, Kathy sticks to her claim of self-defense, and her attorneys argue that it doesn't matter whether Cody presented any actual danger. For her, perception was reality.
Kathleen Denson really believed that Cody Boyd was a hitman, maybe in a prior life, or maybe even then. Mostly, she knew he was the kind of guy that wouldn't hesitate to hurt her. He'd already done it in Cancun.
Mr. Robinson's theory was clearly that Boyd was attacking her and was about to commit or had committed a crime against her.
Coming up, the defense's argument gets put to the test.
It was a self-defense case involving a woman who was scared to death of a man who was in her home. What defense lawyer wouldn't want a case like that?
Prosecutors in Eagle County, Colorado have finished arguing their case for murder. Now it's the defense's turn to convince the jury that Kathy Denson only shot Cody Boyd to save her own life. Their argument hinges on the state's home defense statute, known as the Make My Day Law.
Under that law, Kathleen Denson had a right to use deadly force, even if all that would have happened would be getting beaten up again by Cody Boyd. She didn't have to let him hurt her before she could use deadly force.
Over the course of their relationship, Cody had built himself up as a dangerous hitman, so Kathy had every reason to believe he would kill her.
He had military-style weapons. He had conversions of automatic and semi-automatic weapons. He had the large banana clips. He was everybody's nightmare in a world where mass shootings have become all too commonplace. An astronomical number of firearms were in the home.
Some of them were altered to be fully automatic weapons.
To prove their point, the defense makes a surprising move, asking Kathy to describe what happened in her own words.
Kathleen's attorney, Scott Robinson, put Kathleen on the stand, which is pretty unusual in a murder trial because, you could say something wrong and cook your own goose.
When Kathleen testified. She was impeccably dressed. She, very attractive woman, very poised, articulate.
Appearance, dress, manner of speech, the way somebody wears their hair, the number of ums that they say. All of these things can impact jurors' perception of the credibility of a witness.
Kathy testifies that when Cody Boyd showed up at the ranch that day, he was enraged and also appeared to be high.
Cody Boyd had really wretched teeth, and Kathleen had agreed to pay for a complete restoration. Boyd was showed in the bill $20,000, and he was quite upset. She's immediately frightened because he looks crazed. He looks angry. He demands money.
One of the defense's pathologists did an autopsy on his own of Cody and found cocaine, and they found a sleep drug, I think halcyon, and they found, I think, THC from marijuana. And the pathologist said, you know, these drugs could cause some people to get hostile.
He was in a drug-induced rage and was coming out hurt.
The fact that he claimed to have a darker past certainly played a factor.
The defense argues that whether Kathy intended to kill him or not, Cody had left her with little choice.
The defense felt that Mr. Boyd was coming down there, was being hostile and aggressive towards Miss Denson, and she felt no other recourse other than to defend herself.
Oftentimes, emotions will lead to immediate behavioral responses on people's parts. So there's no cooling off period. There's no time to think and to let the emotion calm down.
The timeline was easily established because he had just been at the dentist. We know exactly when the 911 call went in. So there really wasn't much of a delay between Boyd arriving at the ranch and Boyd receiving the fatal shot. Cody Boyd was high, he was angry, and he was going to go get what he had coming. Of course, as things turned out, he got exactly what he had coming.
But would the jury agree?
It was a very stone-faced jury. They were very hard to read.
The jury has a tough job to do. They're weighing somebody's life in their hands, and, you know, they have to go with the information that was given here.
After only 2 hours, they return with their verdict. To the surprise of many, they find Kathy Denson not guilty.
The jury decided that she did not commit a crime, but it was a homicide. It was a death caused by another person.
Whether the jury acquitted Kathleen Denson because of the Make My Day statute or the self-defense statute or some combination of both, we'll never know.
Only 2 people were there that actually know exactly how it transpired. One of them was dead.
Everybody went home that day except for Cody.
It's a tragic case. It's tragic because I think a lot of people didn't feel that justice was served.
What began as the unlikely romance between a wealthy rancher and an itinerant cowboy has ended in betrayal and bloodshed. But the question remains, who is ultimately to blame?
Miss Seebacher, when she took the stand, there were a lot of inconsistencies with what she had said. So, you know, it painted to the jury that she was not very credible, that, you know, maybe she's a scorned person in this particular case. So I'm trying to seek revenge on Miss Denson.
The people who knew Kathleen Denson believed in her. There was no backlash. The impact on Kathleen Denson was a lot more subtle. Quite frankly, she has never gotten over the trauma of shooting and killing Cody Boyd.
were a wealthy couple living the American dream.
He had immigrated from India. She was a typical Western Pennsylvania teenager.
They had fancy cars, a beautiful home. They lived a life that a lot of people would like to live.
Until a family weekend getaway ended in violence.
It's all hell they're breaking out. It's horrible.
The call that we received was there was a gentleman that had a bloody nose. I'm like, whoa, what happened?
The investigation would uncover a trail of sex, drugs, and greed that culminated in an unbelievable conspiracy.
It just kept building and building and building.
May 13th, 2005. It's a busy Friday night on the Ohio Turnpike, just outside of Cleveland. But around 6:30 p.m., the routine commute is disrupted by cries for help from 45-year-old Donna Munda, whose car is parked in the emergency lane.
She was standing outside the vehicle and trying to wave down traffic. In the vehicle, there was a man bleeding from the nose.
A alert bypasser came by and saw that she was in distress, pulled over, saw a little bit of what was going on. He called 911.
The injured man is Donna's husband, 69-year-old Dr. Ghulam Munda. With them is her elderly mother, Dorothy Smouse. The caller doesn't know what happened, so responding officers aren't aware that they're about to walk onto a crime scene.
You can only imagine how chaotic it was. They've got a car pulled over next to vehicles that are going by 70 or 80 miles an hour and semis. The noise is deafening.
The initial call came in as a gentleman, a Ghulam, who had a bloody nose. That eventually changed as the trooper arrived on scene, and she was able to clarify and called it in as a gunshot wound. I'm like, whoa, okay, so what happened?
Ghulam Munda was born in India on August 10th, 1935. He grew up poor, but as a young man, he set his sights on a better life.
He had immigrated from India in the 70s to go to medical school, and he eventually ends up in Western Pennsylvania as the urologist in the area.
Dr. Munda was a very well-respected doctor in his community. He had purchased a house in an exclusive area of Pittsburgh, and he was all about giving an image of being a successful doctor.
He was well known in the community as being a very good man. His patients really liked him a lot, saying he always took the time to talk to them, to reassure them.
It was through his practice that Dr. Munda met the young woman who would become his wife, Donna Smouse.
Donna was very well known in the community. She had been a cheerleader in high school. She was energetic. She was popular. She was a typical Western Pennsylvania teenager.
Donna, at the age of 18, started working in the doctor's office, doing filing and things of the sort. And Dr. Munda took an interest in her.
They got very close very quickly. She just needed some guidance. She needed someone who could care for her, who could dote on her, who could support her.
Dr. Munda helped her make the decision to go to college, which she did do, and encouraged her to get a master's in nursing at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, which meant that she had to travel 2.5 hours each way to go to classes. He paid for everything.
Despite their age difference, the two seemed to make a perfect couple. In 1990, after more than a decade together, they finally got married.
Donna was working and going to school. Dr. Ghulam was a very well-respected doctor at his hospital. They had fancy cars, a beautiful home, a lot of good friends. They lived a life that a lot of people would like to live.
traveling throughout the world, as well as going to extravagant restaurants in the area, living in a nice home that provided a sense of care, sense of security, as well as some of the opportunities that maybe she wasn't afforded when she was younger.
He treated her well. They got along. Dr. Munda helped her family as well. They had a good life.
But their good life would come to an unexpected and violent end. Now, Dr. Munda has been shot in the passenger seat of their car, and Ohio State Patrol officers are attempting to find out how.
We were able to see where the bullet had entered the right side of his face. He still had gunshot residue on his face and burn marks from the flash of the gun. That's how close the gun was to his temple.
There's all hell there breaking out. You got a major thoroughfare. The traffic is blocked up for miles. Donna began to give her husband CPR. Again, she was a nurse, so she knew how to do that. They call for a life flight helicopter. It's horrible. There's a few crimes that you could think of that are worse than this. An unprovoked attack on an innocent man.
As investigators face the extraordinary scene, they must determine what could have led to the grisly shooting.
Crime is not high on the turnpike at all. You're basically locked in. It's a toll road, so there's no easy way on or off without going through gates.
There's vandalism, there's shoplifting, there's crimes of that nature that occur. We don't handle that many shootings, so there was all sorts of things racing through my mind at the time.
Coming up, investigators construct a timeline of the shooting, which reveals a possible suspect.
They were in line to get something to eat.
That's when she said, "You got to be careful."
Ohio police have responded to the roadside shooting of 69-year-old Dr. Ghulam Munda. As helicopter medics arrive on scene, investigators turn to the victim's wife to piece together what happened.
They're not sure what happened, and they're trying to question Donna, who was virtually beside herself.
Donna claimed a van pulled up behind them. Gunman approaches the car, demands Dr. Munda's wallet. He gives him the wallet, and then the gunman just shoots him right in the head.
Despite heroic attempts to save his life, it's already too late.
He was gone. There was no way anybody could have saved him, just because of the location of the bullet wound.
The projectile entered his right side of his temple and hit something inside the brain, and the shot continued and came to rest at his neck, right in the spine. There was no exit wounds on him. The round stayed inside.
Now facing a homicide investigation, Highway Patrol officers call for backup and begin processing the crime scene.
We went back to the vehicle and saw the shell casing under the rocker panel that was preserved by the initial trooper responding to the scene.
The bullet casing from a 9mm handgun. That was about the only physical evidence that they were able to retrieve from the scene of the crime.
We took some blood samples from the pooling, and that was about it. We weren't able to do any fingerprints.
With so little to go on, police hope the doctor's wife, Donna, and his mother-in-law can provide them with a better lead.
I proceeded to interview Donna and her mom, and Donna began to tell me that they were headed to Toledo because Dr. Munda's nephew, who he considered his son, had just graduated from med school. He accepted a job, I believe, in the Toledo area, and they were looking for a home for him.
Donna says they left Toledo around 4:30 p.m. After about an hour on the road, they decided to make a pit stop.
She said that they'd gone to the service plaza initially because they wanted something to drink and use the restrooms. They went in and used the restrooms, then they were in line to get something to eat, and her husband pulled his wallet out.
The doctor always carried a lot of cash. He carried $100 bills, $50 bills, and that day had a big wad of $50 bills. The person didn't have change at this vending place, so Donna paid for it. His flashing this money was a concern to Donna, and there was some conversation about that. You ought to be careful about flashing money like that.
And it seems she may have been right to be concerned. Donna tells detectives that they'd been back on the road for a little while when it happened.
Dr. Munda asked Donna to drive so he can get some sleep. It had been a long day. It was the end of the week. So Donna started to drive, and he woke up from his nap. And shortly after that, Dr. Munda said to Donna, why don't you pull off in that emergency exit, and I'll get back and drive. So she pulled off to the emergency exit, and she sees this guy running up behind them.
She stated the assailant was there like instantaneously and asked for Dr. Munda's wallet.
So this person must have seen them at the rest area with his wallet open with all the cash. He must have been following them and just pulled over when they decided to pull over.
She said she had Dr. Munda's wallet in her purse.
She pulls the wallet out, gives it to Dr. Munda, who apparently hands it to the killer.
Next thing Donna can recall is that her husband's being shot. She hears a muffled pop light, and she said the assailant fled.
Both Donna and her mother said that this shooting was over in seconds.
Unfortunately, neither of the eyewitnesses is able to provide a good description of the shooter.
Donna's mother, who was in the back seat, she's a very small lady, and the seat sits down very low. So all she could say, basically, was I heard a loud bang.
The description that Mrs. Munda gave us of the assailant was a person about her husband's stature. She couldn't tell if it was black or white, but he was wearing all black mask and gloves, and he also drove a minivan.
Investigators immediately began the hunt for their suspect. Detectives call the Munda's bank to see if the thief has used any of the couple's credit cards, but there has been no suspicious activity.
Police did put out a description and alert for a van that the suspect was driving, but beyond that, they really did not have much to go on.
We had contacted the toll plazas to see if we could see any vehicles coming through, and they did not notice anything unusual. Nobody came through. There were no vans. They don't recall seeing it.
Just days after the shooting, Donna Munda gives an interview from their home and makes a public plea for assistance.
During the TV interview, Donna talked about her husband, what a kind and generous man he was. She missed him a great deal. She doesn't know how she's going to live without him.
I said, please don't leave me. Please don't, baby. Because what they told me that night, I died with him. You just don't know.
Coming up, investigators consider if Donna's tears are genuine or an attempt to throw them off.
She just came off as fake. When you see how people react, I don't know what it is, but you just can tell this is not real.
After her husband's murder investigation hit a dead end, Donna Munda has given an emotional interview to help police come up with a suspect. Instead, Donna's performance turns suspicion on her.
Donna portrayed her marriage as solid, no problems, could not think of a reason why anyone would want to kill her husband. It just seemed like she was saying what she thought people would want to hear. And it was all an act.
And I kept talking to him, trying to tell him, please hang in there, please. I'm doing everything I can. I said, help's on the way. I said, help is on the way. I tried so hard to help him. And I couldn't say something.
I think the interview was very, very damaging because right off the bat, there wasn't a single person that I didn't talk to after that interview where they didn't say Donna had something to do with it.
But investigators have nothing else to suggest she was involved. That is, until a woman named Charlene calls in.
She's on the news that Dr. Munda had been shot. She said, "You should know that Donna Munda and my boyfriend are having an affair."
Charlene's boyfriend is 23-year-old Damian Bradford. He and Donna met in 2004 after a sudden tragedy turned her life upside down.
Donna was a very typical suburban woman, worshipped her father. They were very, very close. And when her father died, that really set her into a tailspin, where she really struggled with his death.
When someone dies, people grieve in different ways. It seems like, Donna Munda turned to drugs.
She was addicted to fentanyl patches. In fact, she had lost her nursing license due to the fentanyl she was stealing from the hospital.
She admitted it, basically, and got herself in a treatment in lieu of conviction process. In other words, if you're charged with theft of drugs, as she was, you could enter into a program. If you successfully complete that program, you don't have a conviction, and that's where she met Damian Bradford.
Damian could not have been more different from Dr. Munda. Damian was a player, very smooth, several girlfriends, and no real job.
But while Donna was connecting with Damian, her marriage was falling apart.
Their relationship suffered a great deal because of the drug addiction. The doctor was embarrassed, and it was a reflection on him as well, that he had a wife who was a drug addict. As a very respected physician in Mercer County, the Hermitage area, that made Dr. Munda look bad too.
She began paying for things, and it's not unsimilar to how her relationship began with Dr. Munda. She began providing for Mr. Bradford and giving him an experience that maybe he wasn't used to. And she purchased a new car, she paid for an apartment for him, and bought him jewelry and clothing.
One day, Damian and Donna were caught by Damian's girlfriend in Damian's apartment that was being paid for by Donna. She called Dr. Munda and told him, "I don't know if you know this, but my boyfriend is having an affair with your wife." So obviously, Dr. Munda confronted Donna.
Investigators believe Damian was the one who had the most to lose if the relationship ended.
She knew that Donna was supporting him, in other words. It was paying for clothing and jewelry and apartment and cars, and that she thought that Damian may have had something to do with the death of Dr. Munda.
I would say that money and greed driving criminal behavior is definitely not uncommon. And it's definitely not uncommon when there is passion, emotion, and love involved. That's why we call it crimes of passion.
Donna admits to the affair, but insists that Damian had no reason to kill her husband.
She just wanted to be happy like every one of us. And living with Dr. Munda at the time was not a happy place for her. They had grown apart. They were not getting along. A divorce was something that she was willing to do. A divorce was something that Dr. Munda was willing to do.
I think Dr. Munda had just had enough of the drug abuse and the rehab, and things just were falling apart because of that.
It seems Donna doesn't have a motive either. Donna would have been able to easily support herself after her divorce.
Before she stopped practicing as a nurse, was earning close to $170,000 a year. I mean, a nurse anesthetist is a really highly regarded and responsible position. She had a lot of money.
But if Damian and Donna didn't kill her husband, who did?
Donna had described the gunman as about 5'2", and wearing a mask, which obviously didn't match him.
Damien was closer to 6 feet tall.
I didn't know what to believe. Is she telling me the truth, or what exactly is going on?
Coming up, investigators put Damien Bradford in the hot seat.
Police got a search warrant for Damien's apartment. They found a stack of $50 bills.
Donna Mundis says her affair with Damien Bradford had nothing to do with her husband's murder. Detectives aren't so sure.
The more that investigators are poking through everything, you're finding out affairs, drug rehab, everything, and it just kept building and building and building.
We had our suspicions, but we really didn't know.
Investigators suspect he killed the doctor so he wouldn't lose Donna's financial support. But when police question Damien, he stays tight-lipped.
Ghulam and Donna had made a decision to consider divorce. And during that, they decided they were going to continue to live under the same roof, as they always had, and that Donna was free to date if she wanted to, and that Ghulam was free to date if he wanted to.
Damien denied having anything to do with the shooting. He told police that he was at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting at that time.
When investigators look into Damien's alibi, however, it's not as airtight as he'd have them believe.
Members that were at the meeting, they remembered him having come in late that day, and when they did the math, they figured out that if he had been the perpetrator of Dr. Mundis' murder, that he had had enough time to travel back from the scene of the crime to the scene of the NA meeting.
It's enough for Ohio police to obtain a search warrant for Damien's apartment. What they find is even more incriminating.
They go to his apartment, they find a bunch of money, $50 bills, which was what Dr. Munda had been carrying.
Police also found multiple cell phones, burner phones.
They started getting warrants to dump the phones, in other words, to extract the data from the phones.
In the meantime, a hidden stash of drugs gives investigators an excuse to take him into custody.
We found needles, little vials of steroid compound. Found out that Damien was actually selling the steroids out on the streets.
Him being on probation and him being in possession of that drug, we were able to arrest him.
When police retrieve the cell phone data, it becomes clear that Damien had been using them for something much more dangerous than selling drugs.
They contained text messages between Donna and Damien.
Thousands and thousands of texts that showed that they communicated a lot, even on the day of the murder.
Police were able to develop a very strong timeline where Donna and Damien were coordinating. Okay, we're leaving now. We'll be here at this point. We'll be here at that point. They were able to just completely chart out through those text messages what those two did.
We were able to track their movements on the Ohio Turnpike from pinging the cell towers. And we were able to map a course from Hermitage, PA, through Ohio and back to Hermitage.
Damien stopped at the service plaza when Dr. Munda, Donna, and her mother did, and that he followed them out of the service plaza as well. So through those cell phone records, they were able to put Damien at that crime scene.
The text messages also prove Donna has been lying to them.
If she wasn't in a relationship like she said, it would have caught her by surprise, like, what is he doing here? So she knew he was there. She knew he was following them. Everything we obtained from the phone records indicated, yes, this shows that they were together in on this.
But it's still not enough evidence to prove she conspired to kill her husband.
They executed search warrants at her home. They executed search warrants on her computers. They got her phone records. They looked at everything and all of her involvement with Bradford and all of that. And after a year of that, they still could not charge her. So after Damien was arrested for a violation of probation, the government made a decision to let him out. The idea was, let's release Damien and see what him and Donna do.
Investigators wiretapped Donna's phone, hoping to catch the lovers talking about the crime.
I'm glad you got out.
Yeah, they let me out yesterday.
I know, I saw.
I wasn't able to call. They got all my shit, my phone, everything. Struggling. Bad.
Same here.
Really?
Yeah. Oh my God. It's a nightmare.
I need to see you though.
Okay.
There was nothing incriminating in their discussions. But the fact that when Damien was released from prison for that short week period of time, that he focused on getting together with Donna was something of great interest to the government.
Prosecutors may not be able to arrest Donna yet, but they believe they have more than enough to charge Damien.
They ultimately ended up charging him with the use of a firearm that results in death and the transporting across state lines. These are all federal crimes, so Damien was looking at the death penalty.
Police still believe Donna was involved, but they did not have the evidence to charge her. They didn't believe what she was saying, but their hands were tied because they didn't have a smoking gun.
In the hopes of getting him to testify against Donna, prosecutors offered Damien a deal. Take his chances with the death penalty, or cooperate and spend less than 20 years behind bars.
I mean, who would say no to that? You can either stay in jail till you're 80 or stay in jail till you're 39. All you gotta do is say she was part of it.
Coming up, will Damien take the fall for Donna or turn on her?
The only way he could save himself was to serve up Donna on a plate.
Damien Bradford is facing a possible death sentence for the May 2005 murder of Dr. Ghulam Munda. But weeks before his trial, prosecutors offer him one last chance to cooperate.
In return for that cooperation, the government agreed that they would dismiss all the death specifications in his case. He would receive a sentence of 17 and a half years for his participation in this crime.
Still, the deal isn't enough to shake his devotion.
I think he believed up until the end somehow. He testified that if he went to trial, that Donna would testify on his behalf.
He is counting on Donna to get on the witness stand and say he had nothing to do with it. The description of the shooter did not match Damien. I know he didn't have anything to do with it.
But as Damien's trial date approaches, that's not exactly how things play out.
Shortly before the trial, the government had subpoenaed Donna to testify, and we notified the court that we would be asserting our fifth.
She declares she is not going to testify. And with that, Damien knew he had very little chance of getting out of these charges. The only way he could save himself was to serve up Donna on a plate. He immediately goes to investigators and said, "Yeah, I did it, but I did it because Donna made me do it."
According to Damien, Donna started planning her husband's murder shortly after they decided to get a divorce.
Donna actually wanted a divorce, but they had a prenup before they got married.
Dr. Munda was to give her $250,000 in cash and share in some cars and other household things and things of that nature.
But she knew he was worth $3 to $6 million, so she came up with this murder plot. She figured she'll get more money, and that's how she eventually convinced Damien to be part of it.
Donna had promised a life of luxury together, saying once we have his millions, we can spend the rest of our lives together and just enjoy life as a couple.
Damien says it took months for her to decide on the perfect place and time.
Dr. Munda often visited a mosque in Youngstown, Ohio, which is near Hermitage where they lived, and he would go there to worship once a week. She first thought he should do it there, but it never worked out. So then she told him that they're going to Toledo and that he could do it then.
Investigators were shocked how cold-blooded it was that Donna had her mother in the car with them to act as a witness. They just could not believe someone would put their mother in that kind of danger.
On Friday, May 13th, 2005, they finally put her plan into action.
He says that they had some kind of a system where she would notify him when they were leaving, and that he could follow them, and that she would pull over, and that he could feign some kind of robbery attempt and then shoot him during that feigned robbery.
Damien tells investigators that after he shot the doctor, he took his wallet and fled the scene. A few miles down the road, he threw most of the evidence and the murder weapon out of the window.
You know, like any highway, the median is a large grass area. And over the course of the next couple of months, whoever was cutting the grass apparently must have been told, look out for any items of clothing or anything like that. And they had found the wallet, some things that had been dumped out of the wallet, a ski mask, a black hat. I think they found a black jacket, all of which Damien acknowledged was him.
He also revealed where the location of the murder weapon was. The murder weapon matched this shell casings and other evidence obtained at the scene.
Damien agreed to testify against Donna, and within a day or so of that announcement, police did not waste any time in arresting her.
On July 24th, 2006, Donna Munda is arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
They had made the decision to go ahead and prosecute her for a capital offense. So all of a sudden, Donna, who had been very well respected as a wife of a revered doctor and a successful nurse anesthetist in her own right, went from there to being accused of being an adulterer and a drug user and a liar.
But the key to a conviction of Donna rests on not only jurors believing that the evidence puts Damien at the scene as the shooter, but they also have to believe Damien's story, that this is Donna's idea. I did it because Donna promised me money.
Coming up, will the word of a convicted drug dealer be enough to get a conviction?
It all comes down to who do they believe more, Damien or Donna?
Damien Bradford has confessed to the murder of 69-year-old Ghulam Munda, but he says it was the doctor's estranged wife, Donna, who orchestrated it. Now, it's up to a jury to decide if Damien is telling the truth.
This happened in our backyard. So for me, personally, it took me a while to, like, hey, separate, is this live or is this fiction?
On June 18th, 2007, Donna's trial begins. Prosecutors paint her as a greedy woman who murdered her soon-to-be ex-husband to keep his estimated $6 million fortune.
Prosecutors weren't thrilled about the deal that they had with Damien, but they realized that unless they had Damien testify against Donna, there was no way they could get a conviction on Donna.
They believed that Donna and Damien had entered into a conspiracy, that the goal of which was to execute Dr. Munda so that Donna could get the money and the inheritance, and Damien and Donna could go off and live forever happy. That was the government's theory of the case.
However, her defense insists the state's theory doesn't add up.
How can anyone rationalize her knowledge of this event and her conspiracy with Damien Bradford to kill her husband? How can that be rationalized when the first thing she does after he's shot is to try to resuscitate him?
She would never had planned a crime of this nature and put her mother in the back seat to be feet away from the execution.
But prosecutors asked the jury to consider, if Donna wasn't in on the crime, then why didn't she recognize her own boyfriend as the killer?
Donna had described the gunman as about 5'4" and wearing a mask, which obviously that identification turned out to be very misleading.
Of course Donna misled me because she wanted to point the finger to someone else.
The government kept harping on the fact that Donna had to have recognized the voice of Damien Bradford. But you've got semis going both ways. At 70, 80 miles an hour, you cannot hear much of anything.
The trial drags on for more than 2 weeks, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. Finally, Damien Bradford takes the stand.
Damien did express great remorse for shooting the doctor. He said he knew it was wrong, he shouldn't have done it, but he knew this is what Donna wanted.
However, Damien admits that to him, it wasn't ever about love.
During the trial, Damien was asked directly, once you got the money, what were you going to do? And he looked at Donna directly and said, I was going to leave her. I have never seen such a physical reaction in a courtroom in my life. She immediately crumbled. Those words were a punch to her gut. The defense attorneys went hard after Damien on the stand, pointing out that he was a convicted drug dealer, that he absolutely could not be believed, that he was making up this entire story just to save himself and to sacrifice Donna. But Damien, he was a very, very believable witness. When the jury finally gets the case, it all comes down to who do they believe more, Damien or Donna?
On July 6th, 2007, after less than a day of deliberations, the jury finds Donna Munda guilty of all charges. To her defense team, the verdict is a miscarriage of justice.
We were surprised at the verdict when it came back. I couldn't imagine that anybody would rely upon a Damien Bradford, given what he was given by the government, in exchange for his testimony.
The deal that he got, 17 and a half years, that really didn't sit well with me. I thought that his sentence should have been a lot longer for killing someone. He was the trigger man. She got life. My feeling was he deserved to get life as well.
And they thought that she didn't act the way a widow should act, whatever that means. That became Exhibit A, and that set them on their path to prove Donna was guilty. There's only really 2 cases in my career that I think they got the wrong guy, and this is one of them.
But to investigators, as well as the patients and loved ones of Dr. Munda, justice had been served. As far as they were concerned, Donna was a woman whose greed had driven her to commit the ultimate act of betrayal.
We finally got an ending. We can get justice for Dr. Munda and Dr. Munda's family and his friends and professionals who wanted to put some closure on this.
Because of Donna, Damien had gotten used to a certain lifestyle, but I don't know how long that was going to last. I don't know if Damien was worried that eventually Donna would leave him. I don't know why these two felt that they could kill the doctor and get away with it.
was a recovering addict who finally turned her life around.
She'd become really positive in her life and she wanted to do something for the future.
She was caring, loving. She did anything she could to help anybody.
Until she decided to stand up to the neighborhood bully.
This had been an ongoing feud that had lasted for over 6 months.
She saw herself as the queen of Beverly Road.
This had all got way out of hand and neither of them were going to back down.
But when their feud ends in bloodshed, will investigators catch the right killer?
It looked like it would be quite a straightforward investigation, but that certainly wasn't the case.
June 29th, 2017, around 7:15 p.m., police in Humberside, England, receive calls about a fight that has broken out on Beverly Road in the town of Hull.
Hull's a very working class city. It's got a population of around 260,000.
Officers arrive to find several people gathered outside a row of apartments.
Onlookers pointed them towards the apartment where the fight occurred. And inside, there's a woman on the floor covered in blood.
She sustained a single stab wound to her chest. And aside from that single stab wound, there were no other visible injuries that could be seen at the time. So officers provided immediate medical attention to her, CPR, to try and get her back around.
As paramedics rush the woman to the hospital, Detective Alan Curtis begins an investigation.
I was the on-call senior investigating officer for the area, so I set some fast-track actions in terms of what I wanted for the scenes to be secured, evidence to be preserved, etc. They don't know whether it's going to be fatal or not.
The first thing he learns is the identity of the victim, 39-year-old Joanne Hemingway.
Joanne was born in 1978 in the town of Hull. She was a middle child with a younger brother and an older sister. Her mother was a nurse. Her father was a truck driver, or a lorry driver, as they say in the UK. And that upbringing gave her a no-nonsense kind of personality.
She was straight to the point. People say, like, you just know where you stood with her.
But Joanne's childhood didn't last very long.
Joanne got pregnant when she was about 15 or 16 years old and had her only daughter, Roxanne.
Joanne loved her daughter, but she had many challenges and struggles in her life, mainly revolving around drug and alcohol addiction.
She did go down that road for a short period of her life. Obviously, it was hard. And I was a child. People, like in my family and my mum as well, protected me from it.
In her early 20s, Joanne found herself living on the streets, forcing her to give up custody of her daughter.
Because of the lifestyle that Joanne had at the time, Roxanne went to live with maternal grandparents.
I was there a lot, so it wasn't really a massive change for me. And I still did see my mum. She did make mistakes like everybody does. And she was regretful of a lot of things as well.
But in 2009, after years of struggling with addiction, Joanne finally found a light at the end of the tunnel.
She was helped by a service called the Lighthouse Project, which really supported my mum, like, through all the bad times.
The Lighthouse Project was a faith-led organisation that helps people turn their lives around.
That's when Joanne decided to change. She'd become really positive in her life and she wanted to do something for the future, for her own and for her family's sake.
Even after she started getting back on her feet, she stayed active in the program. She wanted to give back by helping others like herself.
My mum would attend like every Thursday, I think it was, in the afternoon. My mum said that they were in the same book but they're just on different pages, which was quite nice because that's like quite inspirational thing for my mum to say.
By 2016, Joanne had finally gotten off the streets and moved into an apartment on Beverly Road.
Beverly Road traditionally was a very affluent area of Hull. There's lots of old buildings, but it's not as vibrant and a rich urban population as it was before. It is in need of some reinvestment.
She was in her mid-30s by that point, and even though it might not have been the safest of neighborhoods, it was a step up from what she was used to, and it must have been nice to finally have a place for herself.
Joanne's nurturing attitude also earned her plenty of new friends.
She was caring, loving. She did anything she could possible to help anybody, really.
Because these areas can be quite difficult and dangerous and challenging. She was very protective of the other people that lived in the flats, so they could always rely on Joanne.
Being on the road to recovery also had a positive effect on her relationships with family members.
I would spend lots of time with her. We'd go out for tea. She'd meet me on my dinner from work and we'd go to my nana's house. We were really close.
In fact, things were going so well for Joanne, she was even planning a family vacation.
She'd saved money for a passport and she wanted to go on holiday with me. We was going to go in the summer later on. She was just looking forward to the future. It was bright for her.
But those plans had ended in a violent attack. Now Joanne is in critical condition, and police are working to find out what happened.
What we wanted to do initially was to determine, did we have any witnesses in the area that had actually seen the stabbing?
Coming up, investigators uncover the first piece of the puzzle.
When she was stabbed, the knife had broken in two.
This was obviously fueled by a lot of rage.
"39-year-old Joanne Hemingway has been rushed to the hospital after she was found stabbed inside her Humberside apartment."
Joanne Hemingway had been stabbed and she'd been assaulted in quite a violent attack.
Joanne had suffered a single stab wound to the chest. Obviously, she suffered massive internal bleeding.
The next of kin were immediately notified, and up until that point they had no idea what had gone on. When they got that phone call, it was the first time that they'd heard that she'd been involved in this assault.
We was put into a room and we was just told to wait. The nurses and the doctor came through and said that my mum had lost consciousness for a couple of minutes, but they'd got her heart working again and they was going to operate on her.
Meanwhile, detectives are trying to identify her assailants.
I got the initial call, so I then followed that up immediately with a scene visit to support the officers that were down there and give them clear direction. It was difficult to determine a motive or even identify the offenders initially, so I was very much open-minded because it could have been one of many different hypotheses. It could have been a complete random attack, maybe a robbery that had gone wrong. It might have been domestic related with maybe a partner. I didn't really know at the time.
Crime in Beverley Road these days is quite high. There have been a number of murders in the Beverley Road area in the past couple of years.
So there was a big outcry, there was a lot of anger, and at that time not a lot of information was being released. All we knew was that something quite severe had taken place.
So the first thing police do is canvass the area, looking for anyone who might have seen what happened.
This was an incident that had occurred at 7 o'clock on a main thoroughfare through Hull, sort of rush hour traffic, lots of traffic passing by in the middle of the street. It's not something you would expect in Hull or anywhere else in the country really to happen.
Several bystanders claim to have seen the fight, but none of their accounts are the same.
Sometime between 6:30 and 6:50, an altercation had taken place in the street. This seemed to be a verbal altercation between a number of individuals, and that argument had escalated.
They each saw something different. Some said there were 3 people, some said there were 5 people fighting.
The only thing witnesses agree on is that after Joanne was stabbed, her attackers had run into a nearby apartment.
We'd had secured 3 separate scenes. There was a scene where the stabbing had actually occurred, which was on the main thoroughfare and street on Beverley Road. There was the scene which was the flat where Joanne had gone into at the point of her collapse. And there was a third scene, because initial information at the time was that the offenders that had committed the offence had gone into a nearby flat.
Police quickly obtained access to that apartment. They were hoping they still might be able to catch whoever did this, but no such luck.
There was no one in the flat where we believed the offenders had gone to, and we couldn't fast time process the CCTV, so we were unsure of a direction of travel that the offenders might have gone in.
At the scene, detectives do find an important piece of evidence.
They found the broken handle of a kitchen knife, but just the handle. The blade was missing. So then they went to try to look for it.
It was found subsequently during a search and pointed out by one of the significant witnesses has been found on the road at the scene.
It had a serrated blade like a kitchen knife, so naturally, police believe this is the other half of the handle they found in the apartment, and it was most likely the weapon used to stab Joanne.
We understand from evidence that was found at the scene that when she was stabbed, the knife had broken in two, and the blade of the knife had subsequently fallen out of her chest on the road.
They also know it's not easy to break a knife in two. So this was obviously fueled by a lot of rage. Someone really hated Joanne and wanted her dead.
But who could have hated a woman like Joanne Hemingway that much?
She lived at Beverly Road, and she'd been there a year. She'd made lots of friends, and she was seen as a popular member of that block of flats. Very supportive of the other individuals in there, and she had some really good friends living in the flats there or thereabouts around where she was. We would imagine there might be some fingerprints or contact DNA that we contain on the knife. So the knife handle was recovered, the knife blade was recovered. We also recovered some clothing from the flat where Joanne had been worked on that had been discarded.
Police also began collecting CCTV footage from the surrounding buildings, hoping one of them recorded the fight. In the meantime, investigators speak further with two of their witnesses.
We actually had two significant witnesses that were identified, and they were friends of Joanne who were with her before, at the point of, and also after the incident.
So these friends are able to give police the names of 3 individuals they claim were the ones who were fighting with Joanne.
The suspects turn out to be Joanne's nearby neighbors, Angela Burkett, Glenn Foster, and Gemma Joyce.
That was further corroborated by some of the checks on the housing that we completed. The flat the offenders had gone into, that was actually Angela Burkett's flat. We were unsure who they were at first, but we'd also cordoned off and secured that particular flat itself on the road.
Joanne's friends also claim they know which one of them stabbed her.
During the course of our investigation, with the time that we had in custody, we took significant witness accounts from 2 individuals. Both those people had said that it was actually Glenn Ronnie Foster who had stabbed Joanne Hemingway, and he was the one that was carrying a knife.
The evidence is piling up pretty quickly against them for attempted murder. What no one understands yet is why.
Coming up, a citywide manhunt begins.
We had the resources mobilized from the whole division within Humberside Police.
Hours after Joanne Hemingway was found bleeding to death in an apartment, detectives have the names of 3 suspects.
From the initial information that I had, we gathered at the scene, from the witness testimonies, and from the fast-time immediate local inquiries, there were no other suspects that had been identified at that time other than the 3 people seen to have an altercation who we believe to be Angela Burkett, Glenn Ronnie Foster, and Gemma Joyce.
So there are no signs of them at their apartment, but it hadn't been very long since the stabbing, so police knew they couldn't have gotten very far.
Our main focus in those initial stages was actually the manhunt inquiries. A lot of our resources were dedicated to try and find these offenders.
While the manhunt gets underway, officers take statements from 2 of Joanne's friends who were with her during the assault.
Significant witness evidence that they provided was that Glenn Ronnie Foster plunged this knife into her chest.
They couldn't say for sure what caused him to attack Joanne, but he and the 2 other women had shown up at her apartment a little before 7 p.m. looking for a fight.
Angela and Glenn was all shouting up to my mum, like sort of goading her to come out.
They could be seen shouting up towards the flat where we believed Joanne was at the time. Joanne can then be seen coming out of the flat with something in her hand, which we subsequently discovered to be some kind of metal pole. She'd walked over to where these people were, And then there was a fight between some of the individuals involved.
They said it was chaotic, but the two witnesses at the scene, Joanne's friends, swore it was Glenn that had stabbed Joanne in the chest during the fight. They were able to get Joanne back into the apartment, and that's when she suddenly collapsed.
Her adrenaline was going so much, I don't even think she had realised that she had been stabbed, because only when she gets back to the address that she then collapses.
Back at the station, some of the officers are familiar with two of Joanne's attackers and their criminal records. 42-year-old Glenn Ronnie Foster was born and raised in Hull, and he has a long history of run-ins with the law.
Foster is incredibly well known in the Hull area. He's got a reputation as being a career criminal. It's mainly dishonesty offences, and he's been a long-term drug abuser as well.
Glenn Foster is a very skinny man. To look at him, you wouldn't think he could harm a fly. But in reality, I think that's probably a bit different.
He and Burkett had been a couple for several years, and they lived together in her apartment.
52-year-old Angela Burkett was known to authorities as well.
Angela Burkett's reputation precedes her, and actually in some ways I think she was incredibly proud about that reputation. She's got loads of previous convictions, long-term drug abuse, career criminal, horrible with the officers. She was a challenging individual. She was aggressive and always spoke her mind, and she was not a shrinking violet in any way, shape or form.
Angela Burkett was known for stirring up trouble, and she was very threatening to people if she didn't get her own way. People were actually scared of her. They didn't want to meet her in the hallway. She was just a very unpleasant person.
A lot of people knew who Angela was and did say that she was a bully. She would also beg outside of shops and then become aggressive when people would refuse to give her money.
Because of her drug addiction and all of her lifestyle and circumstances around her was very much a day-to-day existence. It was stealing to pay for drug habit by whatever means necessary.
Like Joanne, she'd been living on the street until she was placed in public housing on Beverly Road.
The third name given to police, Gemma Joyce, turns out to be Angela's 34-year-old daughter.
She had lived with them on and off. It was a similar situation to Joanne and her daughter, actually, except Burkett had never gotten clean.
It was at this point that I made a policy decision to nominate them as suspects for what was at the time an attempted murder, because it was still a stabbing at this time.
None of their past arrests were for violent crimes, however. So what could have caused Glenn Foster to stab Joanne? Investigators would soon get an opportunity to ask him, because only 2 hours into the manhunt, all three suspects are found.
We had the resources mobilized from the whole division within Humberside Police, and we had a series of community officers, response officers, plainclothes officers out trying to look for Glenn Ronnie Foster, for Angela Burkett and also Gemma Joyce. They had been seen on an area further down on Beverly Road by plainclothes officers. All three were detained and arrested for the attempted murder of Joanne Hemingway.
Police immediately collect their clothing and send it to the lab for blood and DNA analysis.
But before detectives can interrogate their suspects, they receive some unfortunate news.
Whilst they were being searched and taken to the police station, I got a call through at 9:06 to say that Joanne had passed away. The information passed to me from the hospital was that Joanne had succumbed to her injuries, namely the single stab wound to her chest.
She suffered a massive cardiac arrest from the internal bleeding, and despite hospital's best efforts, there was nothing they could do to save her.
I just sort of crumbled into the wall. It's just unbelievable. It was just all happened so quickly. There was a lot going through my mind. Somebody was responsible for my mum dying. We just didn't know why.
The case has officially become a homicide investigation. Hoping for a quick confession, detectives confront the trio with the eyewitness testimony.
Glenn Ronnie Foster completely flatly denied being involved in the offence, admitted he was there, but when asked about who had actually stabbed Joanna Hemingway, didn't give any account.
So when Foster wouldn't talk, they tried Burkett and her daughter, but they weren't any easier to crack.
Angela Burkett never actually made any comment during those initial interviews whatsoever. Gemma Joyce gave an account of being there and obviously named the other people that were there, but said that she hadn't actually seen anything. So evidently, that didn't take us any further forward.
Coming up, police finally get the break they've been looking for. But it's not what they expected.
She told various people that she would regret what she had done that day.
There was about to be a real twist in the case.
Detectives in the town of Hull are questioning 42-year-old Glenn Foster, his girlfriend, 52-year-old Angela Burkett, and her daughter, 34-year-old Gemma Joyce, in the murder of Joanne Hemingway.
Police had two witnesses, friends of Joanne, that were there, and they said that Glenn was the one who stabbed Joanne in the chest.
Joanne was well known, and actually so were the individuals that were arrested on suspicion of her murder. So I think the community was in shock.
So far, the suspects aren't talking, but investigators are about to get some answers from a different source.
Fortunately for the investigation team, there was CCTV footage of the incident itself. It was from a Civic camera pointing down the road towards the incident. It was at some distance, but fortunately the camera was pointing in the right direction. It picked up the incident itself, it picked up what happened before and also the aftermath.
The video confirms that 3 people were involved in the attack, but unfortunately, police can't verify their identities.
The quality of that footage was so grainy that it was very hard to see actually who was who.
What it did show was that 4 people stood on Beverley Road at around, the point of the scene where we believe the attack took place. And a figure can be seen walking out of one of the flats on Beverley Road. We've subsequently identified that person as Joanne Hemingway, closely followed by 2 individuals who were friends of hers who were in a flat at the time. Joanne walks over to where these 3 people are on Beverley Road, and there's an altercation that takes place.
When homicide police looked at the CCTV footage, they couldn't really tell who these individuals were. The faces were unrecognisable because of the pixelation, so they couldn't clearly say who had inflicted the fatal blow that killed Joanne Hemingway.
In addition to the CCTV footage, police also found dashcam recordings from several vehicles that were in the area that night, but they didn't give a clear picture either.
That evidence was used to corroborate some of our witness testimony to identify the people that were actually involved, but it didn't cover the point at which we believe Joanne had been stabbed. Nothing did.
However, when the footage is enhanced, police get a clearer picture of what happened.
The officers did some really good work around that, so you can pick up people going in and out of the address, and we think we can see sort of a shine off a knife that comes out. And the enhancement was good. There was definitely a fight.
Joanne can then be seen coming out of her apartment with some kind of metal pole, closely followed by her 2 friends, just like they said.
Still hard to say exactly when Joanne was stabbed during the fight, since she doesn't fall to the ground or anything, but it does seem to indicate who stabbed her.
The dashcam footage that we'd obtained whilst they were in custody clearly identified Glenn Ronnie Foster as having a large knife in his right hand and a baseball bat in his left hand.
Detectives hope forensic tests on the blade found at the scene will prove Foster is their killer. In the meantime, they decide to move forward with the evidence they have.
Police can actually only hold subjects for a certain amount of hours without bringing charges. They get an extension, but they're running out of time, and none of them were talking.
Just before the custody time had expired, we went for a charging decision to the Crown Prosecution Service. Glenn Ronnie Foster was charged and he was remanded in custody. Gemma Joyce and Angela Burkett were released under investigation at the time.
He was the one that had gone there armed with a baseball bat and a knife, so it was clear that he had premeditated this incident.
But investigators still don't have a motive.
They had this evidence against Glenn, but they had no idea why Glenn would stab Joanne. They didn't know what the fight was all about.
Looking for answers, police decide to reach out to the public.
sometimes, people are reluctant to come forward and give us evidential accounts. Unless things are recorded evidentially, then, we're never going to get people to court.
Homicide police ran a series of appeals, and it was from off the back of these appeals that several fresh eyewitnesses came forward that had not only seen the altercation, some of them had seen the lead up to it.
Additional witnesses gave police some very interesting information.
One of Joanne's neighbors says everyone in the area knows who hated Joanne enough to kill her. But it wasn't Glenn Foster.
It soon became apparent that Joanne had had some previous altercations with Angela Burkett.
Apparently, there'd been a feud going on between these two women for quite a while. Angela was extremely belligerent towards the other people, and Joanne tried to help them. So it seemed inevitable that these two would butt heads.
Basically, Joanne had been bullied by Angela Burkett for 6 months prior to the fatal attack.
According to the neighbor, 4 days before the murder, those arguments began to escalate.
Joanne Hemingway had been cycling past Angela Burkett further up Beverly Road, at which point Angela Burkett had made a derogatory comment to her.
Angela had called my mum a fat cow, I think, which my mum wasn't happy about, and I think more so because she was trying hard at the gym. So it did really upset my mum.
Later that afternoon, Joanne decided to confront Angela.
The two of them argued, and then it turned physical, and Joanne shoved Angela to the ground.
Angela Burkett, being the personality type that she is and an individual that she is, didn't take kindly to this.
She told various people that she would regret what she had done that day.
Angela Burkett had said that she was going to stick her, and we took that meaning to be that she was going to stab her.
But did Angela follow through on her threat?
If Foster wasn't the one who stabbed Joanne, then they might have just let the killer go free.
Coming up, witnesses describe the final confrontation between the two women.
After months of this going on, Joanne was not going to take it any longer.
Only one of them was walking away from this.
Investigators have arrested Glenn Foster for the murder of Joanne Hemingway. But new testimony has led police to believe the stabbing was actually the result of a long-standing feud with 52-year-old Angela Burkett.
There's obviously more to this story. So even though they had two witnesses that claimed to see Glenn stabbing Joanne, police realised they could be wrong.
The further work we did post-charge, it began to distance Glenn Ronnie Foster from the offence itself. The significant witness evidence that we had showed that the accounts that were given were inaccurate.
Angela might be the one with the motive, but that doesn't necessarily prove that she's the one who did it. She could have easily gotten Foster to do her dirty work for her. Unfortunately, he's not willing to talk, even to save himself.
Detectives hope forensic tests on the murder weapon will clear up who dealt the fatal blow. But when the results come back a few days later, it isn't exactly good news.
All three persons' DNA were present on the handle of the knife. What the scientists could say was that main contributor to that profile was Angela Burkett. But because DNA techniques are so sensitive, they couldn't exclude Glenn Ronnie Foster or Gemma Joyce as being contributors to that profile.
Since all three of them lived at the same address, it's not unusual that all three of their DNA would be on the knife, so it didn't really help the investigation.
Instead, police focus on learning more about the feud between Angela and Joanne.
It was well known at the time that Angela Burkett was a bully. Subsequent inquiries revealed that this was commonplace amongst most of the residents.
There was still a lot of people that were being spoken to, and some of them had also witnessed what had gone on in the aftermath.
One of them was called Matthew McNamara. He was actually a friend of Joanne's and lived nearby. He was also a friend of Angela Burkett's.
McNamara tells police that Angela seemed to have it out for Joanne from the beginning.
The two of them both had these strong personalities. So when Joanne moved in, Angela tried to intimidate her as well, make her afraid like everybody else was. But Joanne stood up to her.
Joanna Hemingway wasn't one to take kindly to bullies, and she was going to say her mind and say her piece.
A few days before the stabbing, Joanne confronted Angela, shoving her to the ground in front of the whole neighborhood.
Joanne wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone else that Angela bullied as well, which is probably what sent Angela over the edge. She wasn't going to let anyone make a fool out of her like that.
This had all got way out of hand, and neither of them were going to back down, so it culminated into this one final tragic battle.
In fact, McNamara says Angela even confessed to the stabbing.
He claimed that Angela Beckett had approached him and said, "I've done something really bad, something that's going to result in me getting sent down."
Another friend also comes forward to tell police about conversations they've had with Angela after she was released.
Based on the evidence that the police now had, not just the physical evidence that they found at the scene, but the CCTV footage and the mounting witness testimony, it looked highly likely that she was the one that had delivered that fatal blow.
They're working on an arrest warrant when Angela starts threatening their witnesses. Apparently, she found out that people were going behind her back and talking with police.
Burkett had been intimidating one of our prosecution witnesses, McNamara, at the soup kitchen. She'd been overheard shouting things like, "You're a wrong and you're going to get it," towards him.
The self-protection and narcissism level there is huge. She's saying, "Look at me, I'm capable of murder. Are you really going to try to go against me?" That's how powerful she believes she is.
Investigators decide to take Angela into custody before she can make good on those threats.
Angela Burkett was arrested for witness intimidation. She was re-interviewed by officers, but once again gave no comment to any of the questions that were posed to her during the interview.
Foster still isn't talking either, even though his girlfriend seems perfectly willing to let him take the fall for her.
Fortunately, Angela's daughter decides to come clean and tell police what she knows.
I think there was a time where she was locked up in prison, which gave the police the opportunity to go see her when she was level-headed and didn't have the influence of anybody around her. There probably was a sense of guilt that she'd been involved in a murder.
She also could sympathise with Joanne as being a mother, and that Joanne would never see her daughter again, and that resonated with her.
She winds up corroborating what other witnesses have told police and agrees to testify against her mother.
On July 19th, 2017, more than 2 weeks after Joanne Hemingway was stabbed, Angela Burkett is charged with murder.
When we found out that it was Angela that had stabbed my mum, we was happy that she'd been arrested and that the person that was responsible for it was going to get punished. A bit of relief, really, that they'd got the right person.
They dropped the murder charge against Glenn Foster and changed it to assault. He might not have been the one who killed Joanne, but he clearly participated in the attack.
He was also charged with possession of an offensive weapon, which included a knife and a baseball bat.
But will prosecutors be able to get a conviction?
The defence don't need to prove innocence. The prosecution need to prove guilt.
Coming up, a daughter helps put her own mother behind bars.
They say that blood is thicker than water, and that suggests that you would be loyal to your family.
She knew it was the right thing to do.
On November 27th, 2017, Angela Burkett stands trial for the murder of Joanne Hemingway. Prosecutors describe Angela as a neighborhood bully who stabbed Joanne because she was the only one who dared to stand up to her.
Angela was more than just a drug addict with a history of violence. She saw herself as the queen of Beverly Road.
I think she was incredibly proud about that reputation, the fact that she was top dog around there, and that no one would normally challenge her.
She was very threatening to people if she didn't get her own way. People were actually scared of her.
To prove it, the prosecution presents evidence from the crime scene, as well as CCTV footage from the attack.
The prosecution set out to show that it was actually Angela Burkett that had committed the fatal blow, and not, in fact, Foster, who it appeared was there at the time.
They also call a number of witnesses, including McNamara, Joanne's neighbors, and 2 friends who were with her after the attack.
But the prosecution's star witness is Angela's own daughter, Gemma Joyce.
They say that blood is thicker than water, and that suggests that you would be loyal to your family. But even Angela Burkett's own daughter admits that it was her mother who killed Joanne.
She revealed that she'd overheard this conversation where her mother had said, I've done something quite bad, I've killed someone. And she stood there in the witness box and testified against their own flesh and blood.
It must have been incredibly difficult for her to provide evidence to a prosecution that would basically look to convict her mother of murder, but she knew it was the right thing to do.
Gemma tells the jury that on the day of the stabbing, her mother had gotten into yet another argument with Joanne Hemingway.
An hour before the attack, Angela and Joanne had come to blows again outside their flats on Beverly Road.
She said that Angela was angrier than she had ever seen her before. The fact that Joanne had dared to humiliate her in front of the entire neighborhood really set her off.
It was quite clear that she was out for revenge. She was like a woman possessed, and she wanted this matter dealt with there and then.
Gemma says her mother convinced her and Glenn to help teach Joanne a lesson once and for all.
Mr. Foster was carrying a baseball bat, and he also carried a knife. Angela Burkett also had a knife.
They're shouting up at the windows to try and get Joanne out, shouting derogatory comments.
When Joanne comes outside, she and Angela go straight for each other. Gemma said things happened so quickly that she didn't even realize how badly Joanne was hurt until everything was over.
When Joanne Hemingway stepped back, Gemma Joyce noticed a puddle of blood on the center of her chest. The only person that could have stabbed her at that specific point was Angela Burkett.
But the defense argues that Gemma's testimony doesn't prove anything. The killer could have just as easily been Glenn Foster.
Gemma never actually saw the stab inflicted on Joanne Hemingway.
The defence were trying to say that Glenn Foster actually had the knife and delivered the blow that killed Joanne Hemingway.
They poke holes in virtually every part of the prosecution's case, including poor video quality and unreliability of the witnesses.
That was a really difficult thing to watch. People that were addicts having to stand in the witness box and give evidence to the best of their knowledge, and then they were questioned by her defence whether it was actually true and could they have been under the influence when what they were saying happened.
But what would the jury believe? On December 4th, 2017, they returned with a verdict after only 2 hours of deliberation.
We was panicking a little bit, didn't know what was going to happen. And then I remember there was a man at the end that stood up and the judge was asking, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty? And it felt like the longest pause ever for him to say guilty. But once he said it, it was just a massive relief. And a massive weight was lifted off our shoulders.
Angela Burkett was sentenced to life in prison plus 18 months for witness intimidation. She'll have to serve at least 20 years of that before she can be eligible for parole.
To protect her friends and family, Joanne Hemingway stood up to the neighborhood bully. And for that, she'd paid the ultimate price.
To some degree, when Joanne has the altercations with Angela Burkett, she signs her own death warrant. The fury that she invokes, Angela goes back to get that knife because she is going to teach Joanne her full and final lesson. And that's exactly what she does.
Joanne Hemingway has been taken away from her daughter and from her family, and they'll never get to see her again. And as much as the conviction of Angela Burkett is some small crumb of comfort to them, it will never bring her back into their lives.
Just knowing how my mum would want me to be, and she wouldn't want me to be sad. She'd want me to live the best life I possibly can. So that's what I'll try and do for my mum.
They were a kind-hearted couple with big plans for the future.
They were going to remodel the house that they had lived in, sell it, and move on. They were, I guess probably a good term would be urban pioneers.
Until a clash with a new neighbor put an end to their dreams.
Any little thing would set something off between them.
There was no love lost there, but no one could have imagined it would go this far.
But was it just a rivalry gone wrong? Or the beginning of something far more dangerous?
This really is the unimaginable. You don't move into a home waiting to find a nightmare.
May 18th, 1999. It's a quiet night in the Denver, Colorado suburbs. Until 9 p.m., when a single gunshot rings out on Humboldt Street. Two neighbors, 27-year-old Deborah Loisel and 36-year-old Beverly Grant, both hear it.
I was in the kitchen, and 2 seconds later I heard a pop like a firecracker, and I ran out of the house.
I'm talking to my sister, so I put my phone down, go outside. There's nothing outside. It's just eerie, just silence and stillness. I said, Deborah, did you hear that sound? And she comes running forward. She goes, I did hear that.
Parked in the street is a truck belonging to Deborah's boyfriend, Jason Horsley. And as Deborah approaches it, her worst nightmares come true.
Jason Horsley is laying inside his vehicle. His legs are sticking outside and he's twitching. She goes up and sees he's shot.
My boyfriend was in his truck. He couldn't breathe.
She just starts screaming and yelling. By then, our neighbors are pouring out of the house, so I start directing them, call 911, call 911.
But Jason has already lost a lot of blood, and there's no telling whether paramedics will arrive in time to save him.
I ran into the house, found the keys. I thought I was coming driving down here because the hospitals were so close.
Other neighbors came out, and they drove Jason Horsley to the hospital at the end of the street.
The question on everybody's mind was why. This was a nice couple in a nice neighborhood. No one would ever expect anything like this to happen.
25-year-old Jason Horsley was raised over 400 miles away in the small town of Sheridan, Wyoming.
Jason was, like most kids, very active in this community. He was into fishing, snowboarding, hiking. He was a wrestler. He was in the National Honor Society. I mean, he was really kind of a natural-born leader.
After high school, Jason moved west to attend Pacific University in Forest Grove, Oregon.
This is really a formative time for a lot of people, and Jason was smart, he did well, but what he really liked was working with his hands.
When he was finished with college, Jason decided to pursue a career in carpentry.
By this time in Denver, the city was booming. There were lots of construction jobs available, and because Jason spoke Spanish fluently, he was able to become a foreman. It appeared everybody liked Jason. I mean, he was a man's man, really the kind of guy you could always count on.
Those qualities also made Jason very popular with the women of Oregon, especially Deborah Loisel.
Jason was a good-looking guy. He had lots going for him. He really had no trouble in the woman department. But when he met Deborah, he knew that there was just something special there. Jason and Deborah's relationship really kind of developed quickly. They both wanted to live in Colorado, so they loaded up their 2 dogs and moved to Denver.
The young couple quickly settled on a house in the up-and-coming neighborhood of City Park West.
The neighborhood that Jason and Deborah moved into was a segregated community back in the 40s and 50s, but at this point it had started to gentrify. Humboldt Street is still kind of in the early stages of gentrification, so the property values there are really low, and they were kind of able to get a house for pretty cheap.
They were, I guess probably a good term would be urban pioneers. They were going to remodel the house that they had lived in, sell it, and move on and continue to do that in a neighborhood.
Jason and Deborah quickly became friends with the other families in the area.
Jason got his job in construction, and he was really popular in the neighborhood because if anything broke in your house or you needed help fixing something, he was always there to help.
I did own 3 properties on that block. I lived in one of my houses, and I had 2 others rented out. Jason was the friendliest guy. When I'd have yard parties, they'd come over. So we shared a lot of good times together.
But the good times wouldn't last forever. A little over 2 years later, Jason has been shot outside their house on Humboldt Street. And as Deborah rushes him to the hospital, Denver police are tasked with finding out who did it.
The area that they moved into was a nice area, but it hadn't always been that way. The city of Denver encouraged development in that area because they were trying to build it up and they wanted to make it a nicer, safer community.
In 1985, when I was a young detective, it was certainly a different neighborhood. A lot of gang members and crack cocaine was sold from the houses there.
So the house that Jason and Deborah bought had been previously seized by a drug warrant. And so because they didn't know who shot Jason initially, they were wondering whether or not his shooting was somehow connected with the previous owner who'd lost that house.
Coming up, investigators discover that not everyone loved Jason Horsley.
She wouldn't stop. She was in my face. She looked like she was about to hit me.
"25-year-old Jason Horsley has been rushed to the hospital by his girlfriend Deborah after she found him shot outside their home.
Even though neighbors had heard the shot and had gotten to Jason within moments of the shooting, he was bleeding profusely, and time was of the essence.
They took him to the emergency room, which is no more than 3 blocks from where the shooting happened. The ambulance entrance is you can see it from his house.
Doctors work quickly to save Jason's life, but they are too late.
He was pronounced dead at the hospital.
Dr. Henry from our coroner's office believed that he was probably dead instantly. Bullet went through his back, went through his heart, and exited his body.
Based on the personal and targeted nature of the crime, investigators rule out any connection to the home's previous owners and drug seizure.
The forensics show that there was stippling on the skin, which is usually an indication that the individual was shot at a very close range. Stippling is just when you have on the skin, you'll have small marks and burns that are caused from the actual gunpowder from that round being discharged from the weapon. And because it's so close to the skin, the powder actually contacts the skin and causes this burning effect.
Nothing seemed to have been stolen from Jason or his truck.
The truck was used to get Jason to the hospital that night, and after that it was basically towed from the hospital to the impound lot where a search warrant was conducted on that truck.
Detectives are hoping Deborah might be able to give them some answers.
Deborah was obviously upset, but she still seemed eager to help the police.
Why don't we start by just telling me the events, what happened this evening?
My boyfriend and I arrived home from walking our dogs down by the river. I don't know what time that was. And he said, I'm going to clean up my truck.
Jason was a carpenter. He had a lot of tools. So every night his practice was to take them, every single one out and repack his truck because he'd leave 4 or 5 in the morning. His truck was like his workshop. So by the end of the day, it's just thrown in there. But he took the time meticulously every evening to do that.
According to Deborah, Jason would pull his truck up and park on the street really anywhere there was a space closest to their home. And on this particular day, he parked his truck in front of Malika Griffin's house.
According to Deborah, Malika is exactly who she thinks may be responsible for the shooting.
And how about this lady that we're talking about, the next door neighbor?
I've only seen her in the last month. I didn't meet her formally.
Describe her for me.
She's about my height, so I'd say 5'4". A black woman with a short afro. She's probably pretty young. I would say 23 or 24. And stalking.
Deborah tells police that shortly before the shooting occurred, she heard Malika arguing with Jason.
I went in the backyard to water the grass. She has a gate that you can always hear when she's going and coming close, and then I heard, talking.
Malika come out and kicked this stuff and told him to get it off of her sidewalk, and he couldn't park his car in front of her damn house.
He was saying, I don't know, leave me alone, whatever, and she was saying, you're a faggot, you suck dick, something like that. And then I came out and I said, this is city right away, he has the right to be here.
Deborah says Jason left to get their neighbor Beverly, who was also Malika's landlord. But Deborah and Malika continued to argue.
Jason came to me a bit before the shooting happened because his girlfriend and Malika were engaged in a kind of heated argument. Things kind of got out of hand and just really escalated into ugliness.
She was in my face, and I was like, you need help. I'm sorry you feel angry at the world or whatever's going on in your life. You've gotten along with everyone. I don't know what your problem is. She looked like she was about to hit me. I said, I'm going to call the police if you hit me and file charges against you.
Malika had a roommate named John. And at that point, he came outside and began to usher her back into the house. Seemed to blow over quickly. Malika went back inside of her home, and Jason went back to organizing the tools in his truck.
But a little while later, both Deborah and Beverly heard the gunshot and came running back outside.
Deborah indicated as soon as she heard that loud noise, she thought it was a gunshot and immediately came outside. And unfortunately, what she thought was a gunshot turned out to be true.
Now, when you went back outside, Jason was in the truck. Did he say anything to you?
No, he couldn't speak. He was breathing. He just said...
And then someone came out then?
All the neighbors started.
All the neighbors
started screaming, she shot him, she shot him.
So the police learned that Malika and Jason and Deborah had this fight, and so they looked at her, but at the same time, it begged the question, why would you kill someone over parking in front of your house?
It's incomprehensible that an argument over tools could lead to a murder.
Deborah doesn't know whether Malika owns a weapon, but she tells investigators that this isn't the first time they'd had problems with their new neighbor.
Turns out that there's a history of bad blood between these two women, and it turns out that it's over Deborah's two dogs.
But had an angry neighbor really resorted to murder? Coming up, a neighborhood argument quickly escalates out of control.
Any little thing would set something off between them.
It's been less than 2 hours since Jason Horsley was shot and killed by an unknown assailant. His girlfriend Deborah believes it was their next-door neighbor, Malika Griffin.
According to Deborah, they had a history of confrontation with Malika, and Deborah described Malika as an angry young woman.
The first conversation I had with her was about a month ago. I was digging a hole for a tree in my front yard, and she was walking by, and I made sure my dogs were on the front porch.
Their dogs had a reputation for being unruly. They would charge on people, and they're the friendliest things, but one is huge, and their barks are convincing.
She came right up to the fence by my yard. My dog approached the fence and was barking at her. He's protective of the house, and he's protective of me.
Those are like her babies, in a sense. And they were harmless, but if you don't know them, you don't know that. She goes, "Hey, lady, hold your dogs." I mean, natural response, you were startled.
You got a situation where Malika and this dog just aren't used to each other. And I think in most normal circumstances, people would just let something like that go.
But according to Deborah, her new neighbor wasn't interested in resolving things peacefully.
Malika told Deb, if those dogs get into my yard, I'm going to kill them.
I said, well, you're stupid for taunting him. Why would you come over to the fence if you saw, you know my dogs, you've lived there.
Deborah called Malika stupid, and Malika reacted very violently and angrily to being called stupid. And I think that really shook Deborah up.
She told her straight out, "If you punch me, I'm going to call the cops." At that point, Malika said, "I don't do prison, bitch. Wait here," and went inside the house.
After that, I was bawling, crying in my front yard. So I've never had something like that happen to me before.
Deborah said she spoke to Malika's landlord, Beverly, about the incident, but decided not to make the problem worse.
Eventually, Deborah just decided to chalk it all up to a misunderstanding, and she really never talked to Malika after that.
However, the problem didn't go away. Instead of arguing with Deborah, Malika began turning her anger towards Jason.
She wants to fight with us once he was fixing the gutters. And she was just constantly, you got to pick up your trash, you got to pick up the trash, and he was adjusting the gutters. He didn't have anything on.
It seemed like Malika had a serious temper, but that didn't mean she was capable of murder.
Detectives knock on Malika's door, hoping to get her side of the story, but she isn't home.
The police interviewed the landlord across the street, Beverly Grant, and according to Miss Grant, the real tension was between Malika and Deborah, and Jason really didn't have anything to do with it.
According to Beverly, both women seemed to be equally at fault for the bad blood between them.
Deborah would light into anyone that said anything about the dogs. Jason came to my door and knocked and said, "Bev, they're out here arguing. Could you come out here and intercede?" So I did. And when I got there, I just heard the most horrible things coming out of Deborah's mouth.
Beverly Grant told the police that she had tried to play mediator between these two women, but it really didn't help. They just hated each other.
Deborah and Malika had such a contentious relationship. Any little thing would set something off.
But Beverly found it hard to believe Malika was the sort of person who'd commit murder.
I had a coffee shop at that time, and she frequented my coffee shop. I was impressed with her because she loved seniors, and I noticed that she talked to all the seniors that were there and had great conversations around academia and progressive issues.
Malika Griffin was extremely smart. She had a degree in chemistry. She graduated with honors.
Over about a 2-month period of knowing her, I learned she lived in a hostel. Then in talking, I had an opening it for a room in a house, and it was shared with another man, and she had no problems. Just so happened that what I was going to be charging her was just slightly less than what she was paying at the hostel.
So Malika got a job at a local pharmacy. She moved in with John, and outside of her conflict with Deborah, she seemed to kind of get along with everybody.
She had a warm personality, engaging. She was a model tenant as far as that goes, kept her place very clean.
A routine background check seems to confirm Beverly's opinion of Malika.
What she had to her advantage was the fact that she had no criminal history. We didn't have her fingerprints on record.
There was no red flags with her activities with neighbors or how she worked. I mean, she functioned well in society.
At that point, it doesn't look like she's going to be a suspect after all.
Coming up, another neighbor comes forward with new information that changes everything.
It looked like she was going to war. The question was, with who?
Denver police are investigating the murder of 25-year-old Jason Horsley. His girlfriend, Deborah, believes their neighbor, Malaika Griffin, is responsible. But detectives aren't sure the model tenant could be capable of homicide.
Malaika's background was pretty average. She didn't have a criminal history. By all accounts, interviews of her family and friends growing up, she was a pretty normal girl, did well in school.
Detectives canvass the neighborhood and they find a witness that says that they saw Malaika Griffin running down the street moments after the shooting.
Detectives immediately return to Malaika's house to speak to her roommate.
Police interview Malika's roommate, John, and John told them that after the fight Malaika had with Deborah, she came in and she seemed fine. John said that she left while he was watching TV. She had on a red jacket, she had her backpack, and she seemed fine. Nothing seemed unusual about it.
John agrees to let investigators search their home, and what they find is surprising.
Inside her room was a small single bed, a dresser, and then a small closet. The only thing she had in her closet was no clothes, was a 9mm caliber high-point rifle, fully loaded.
The carbine rifle was also equipped with a high-capacity magazine that was loaded with hollow point bullets. This is similar to the weapon that was used in the Columbine massacre that had happened just a month prior. So this is huge.
But that's not all they discover.
Inside her dresser drawer were 2 hand grenades, and the fuse packs were intact, so we backed out of there and called the bomb squad.
It looked like Malaika was going to war. The question was, with who?
Her roommate had no idea that she had hand grenades or a gun in her closet in there.
While specialists secure the dangerous arsenal, detectives speak to another neighbor named Gabriel Pierce. He claims Malaika asked him for help moments after the shooting.
Malaika was his aunt's friend. She pounded on the back door, was breathing heavy, and said that she was in trouble. She needed to get rid of this. Lifted up her jacket and could see a large semi-automatic pistol.
She said, "I just killed somebody. Help me get out of here." And when he refused, she fled.
He said, "I don't have nothing to do with that. Get out." She ran out the back alley and took off.
Gabriel had no idea where she went.
When police search the alley behind Gabriel's house, they find a red jacket on top of a dumpster.
The piece of clothing they found was distinctive, and so they knew that it was hers. It was something that would have definitely identified her.
Through the course of canvassing the neighborhood, we found a black backpack. She carried a black backpack with her most of the times that she went.
That backpack belonged to Malaika. It even had her ID in it.
In a few short hours, Malaika Griffin has gone from model tenant to murder suspect. And alongside her stockpile of weaponry, investigators find evidence of a frightening motive.
Police found what appeared to be Malika's personal handwritten journal.
You could only describe this journal as extremely disturbing, and it really offered readers a glimpse of the real Malaika and who she was on the inside. Because on the outside, you would have never seen any of this. Her journal pages were filled with rage, with hate, and with extreme emotional distress.
Not only did we find some material that certainly is suggestive of terroristic or subversive type of behavior, but she had propaganda posters and things like that in the home as well. And she didn't care much for white people.
The book was almost completely full about an impending race war. And obviously she thought she needed to arm herself for this upcoming confrontation. Her state of mind, I suppose that probably really played into the shooting with Jason Horsley.
She had a huge problem with white people and a huge problem with men. Jason represented everything that Malaika hated.
The evidence brings heightened urgency to the search. As far as police are concerned, their fugitive is armed and incredibly dangerous.
Police found several things in Malika's backpack that suggested it was not going to be easy to take her into custody. She had survival magazines, she had information about how to change your identity, and she also had information about how you could harm police officers.
How to booby trap things, how to snipe police officers, those type of things were not what I would think we would find in that lady's person.
At one point, when Malika is fighting with Deborah, Malika tells her, "I don't do prison." And it turns out that was not just a threat.
Coming up, the search for Malika Griffin becomes a nationwide manhunt.
There's really no telling how this could escalate.
Just 3 hours after Jason Horsley was murdered outside his Colorado home, investigators have a suspect, 28-year-old Malika Griffin. But so far, they've been unable to locate the volatile fugitive.
Police need to do everything they can to apprehend her immediately. She presents a danger to everybody she encounters. She's going to be desperate. She could hurt somebody again.
Authorities' concern for public safety increases when they learn that Malika threatened another friend into helping her disappear.
She'd continued westbound on 23rd down to the 800 block where she knocked on another acquaintance's door, and that turned out to be Monique Thomas.
Well, why don't you go ahead and start into the beginning and just tell me what happened?
Okay, basically, she came banging on my door. I looked out the window and said, hey, went down the stairs, opened the door. When I opened the door, I smelled alcohol on her breath, but she was real nervous. She was like, I was like, what's wrong? I let her in. And she's like, I need to use your car. I'm like, you need to use my car. You can't use my car, but I'll take you where you need to go.
When Monique refused to help Malika, she confronted Monique with a gun.
Malika pointed at her and said, give me the keys. Monique had her young son in the house. I believe he was 3 or 4 at the time. She certainly didn't want the boy to be involved in any kind of shooting, so she did give her the car keys.
It was serious. And she said, I don't want to do this. And don't scream, don't call the police. And she unplugged the phone line. I kept looking at her, and she just had that blank stare. And I'm worried, I just couldn't believe it.
Monique tells police that she doesn't know where Malika was going, but she was able to tell them that Malika was driving an older model burgundy sedan.
Investigators immediately put out an alert on the vehicle.
We boloed the information to the metro area. I even went so far as to have our dispatchers contact the state of Nebraska, Kansas, and I think even Illinois, because we had no idea where she was.
She could be headed anywhere. It's nighttime, so they really need to broaden their scope at this point and bring in more resources. And this becomes a really critical point in the investigation.
The next morning, a forensics team begins processing Jason's vehicle for evidence.
I actually found the slug inside his truck and the spent shell. So she had to reach like that for the slide to eject and the 9mm round, the casing, go inside the truck. The slug went through his body and lodged inside the truck where we were able to recover it.
Interviews after the crime were committed by one of the witnesses indicated that this was a handgun that had a laser sight on it, and the ballistics from the shooting showed that it was a 9mm handgun.
However, days pass before investigators get another lead.
We had Malika's description, the fact that she was armed with a large caliber 9mm pistol, laser sighted, so we wanted everybody to be aware. I thought she'd probably be stopped before she got out of Colorado. Turned out 3 days later, we were notified by a person in Iowa City, Iowa, that the car was there and the car had died.
Unfortunately, Malika already disappeared again.
A few days after that, police receive word from Malika's mother that she's in Chicago. But once again, Malika seems to be one step ahead of them.
By the time they got there, she'd vanished without a trace.
That was pretty much her last known whereabouts. And so police began to speculate, where could she have gone? And it really was anybody's guess.
At that point, they came to the FBI and requested our assistance. The FBI went to a federal judge and obtained an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant, which we call a UFAP. That UFAP warrant allows the FBI to utilize all of our people and our technology in the hunt for somebody that's gone on the run.
And that's huge, because now this means that Malaika's on everybody's radar.
However, even with multiple law enforcement agencies looking for her, Malaika continues to evade capture. After several months, authorities finally turned to the media for help.
In February of 2000, America's Most Wanted aired this case for the first time. They really wanted to help investigators find Malaika, because it was pretty unusual that at this point she was still on the run.
A UFAP warrant gives us national and international capability, and that's the benefit of a UFAP warrant. Instead of having that state warrant in place, we can actually look anywhere in the United States, and we can utilize our agents that are overseas as well.
We would get calls from everywhere. China, Mexico. I thought maybe she might have made it to Mexico. Someone said that she was taking Spanish classes. Again, very intelligent. If she could speak Spanish, Mexico, Central America, even South America might work for her.
As the months turn into years, investigators begin to lose hope of ever finding Malaika, until they finally get the break they've been looking for.
In June of 2005, America's Most Wanted aired the story for the 9th time. And once again, tips flooded the hotline. But this time, there was a special tip.
I received a telephone call from a previous supervisor. I had worked in the San Diego division, and I knew the individual that was calling me. He said that their division had received a really good tip for Malaika. And normally when we get tips, I'm not too confident that it's going to pan out. However, I knew this individual, and he felt like it was a credible lead. So that night began the process. We confirmed that the UFAP was still in place, and they started doing their investigation in San Diego.
Someone called to say that they recognized the woman on their television screen and that she matched the description of a coworker, someone who just so happened to be working at a biotech company. She was going by the name Lake Griffin.
Coming up, investigators finally catch up with their suspect. And this time, they're not taking any chances.
A tactical unit wearing bulletproof vests were the first to go in.
Over 6 years after the murder of Jason Horsley in Denver, Colorado, detectives have cornered their suspect, Malaika Griffin, 1,000 miles away in San Diego. Given her history and arsenal of weaponry, they've come prepared.
The Violent Crime Squad set up surveillance on an address that she had provided as a residence. And after about 2.5 hours, they were able to confirm that an individual matching Malaika's description was actually in that residence.
A tactical unit wearing bulletproof vests were the first to go in. They weren't taking any chances. Malaika was considered armed and dangerous.
But as difficult as Malaika had been to find, her arrest is easy.
The Violent Crime Squad, with some SWAT operators, set up on that residence, knocked on the door, and Malaika answered the door and was immediately placed into custody.
She didn't put up a fight. However, she wouldn't reveal her identity.
In June 2005, Malaika Griffin is extradited to Colorado to face charges of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. On February 27, 2006, her trial begins.
At the trial, prosecutors argued that Malaika left the fight with Deborah and Jason, went into her house, and came back with a gun, which meant that this was a premeditated act. Considering her radical beliefs, Malaika's motive was clear.
They described her as a dangerous, extreme militant. fighting against the world, essentially.
Prosecutors were able to show the jury the weapons and her subversive books, but the most damning evidence against her was Malika's own journal.
Prosecutors argue that even though Malika didn't know Jason Horsley, he represented everything she hated most.
This was a white couple moving into a predominantly African-American neighborhood, and you could look at this as gentrification at its worst.
He was disturbing the place that she called home. In her journal, she's describing a guy just like him as an oppressor. So it's easy to imagine that he quickly became a target.
On March 2nd, 2006, Malika takes the stand to tell the jury her side of the story.
Malika claimed that after the argument with Jason and Deborah, she went back into her house just to get her backpack. She really just needed some time to cool off. She grabbed her bag, and in her bag was a gun that she carried a long time without any incident. A single woman carrying a gun, she's living in a big city, so I don't think it's strange that she would carry a gun with her. After her fight with Deborah, Malika saw Jason go back to his truck, and she claimed that she thought he was going to get a weapon.
According to Malika, she shot Jason in self-defense. But prosecutors argue that Jason's wounds prove otherwise.
Based on the trajectory through the body and the nearness of the muzzle to Jason's back, he was not in a position where he could offer any kind of physical threat.
Jason was leaning inside of his truck with, he couldn't even see who was behind him. The only thing exposed was his back and his legs. She walked up, aimed her large caliber 9mm pistol with a laser sight, put it right in the middle of his back and pulled the trigger.
When confronted with her journal, Malika tries to pass it off as a work of fiction.
It was her position that she was going to write something and that what she was going to write was going to have a positive spin on it.
She said that she was simply writing a play. However, it was very easy for prosecutors to poke holes in that defense.
I don't believe it was a manuscript. I think it was a manifesto of hate.
The jury seems to agree. On March 6th, 2006, after 8 hours of deliberation, they find Malika guilty on all charges.
She was very, very angry with the white race. Jason happened to be a white male, and I don't know what, if she just snapped that night, something made her go. I truly think that the fiance, Deborah Loisel, is probably very happy that she went inside when she did. I truly believe Malika came out to shoot her. Not that she wouldn't have shot Jason also, but I think her intent was truly to shoot Deborah.
She was given a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole, and on top of that, she was sentenced to another 10 years consecutive for the aggravated robbery.
Our objective in any homicide case is to bring justice to the victim because they can no longer speak for themselves. We become that victim's voice. We felt that we had that success here.
A young woman's misguided hatred had ended in tragedy for both the family of the victim and their community.
This really is the unimaginable. You don't move into a home waiting to find a nightmare. You move into your home to find a dream. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way for Jason and Deb.
When you're dealing with somebody that you don't truly know, somebody that has argued with you in the past over trivial things, you never know what they're capable of.
It's more than a story to me. I knew Jason and he was a friend. And that's kind of the relationship that we may have had to the present day didn't get to happen. He didn't get to have kids, things like that. When I have the opportunity to encounter neighbors, of course that comes up in our reminiscing because it was a surreal tragedy.